There's always a way out, and there's always a way out of self-limiting beliefs, but you need some structure for that. So that might take writing things down. This would be an example of a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy approach. You write it down, and then you dispute it and say, where's the evidence that that's true, that I'll never love again? He was the only one for me. And is that fact or fiction? And then you have an alternate thought that's a healthier thought to replace the older one.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. I am your host Simon Brazier. Here at Truehope Cast we take a deep dive into mental health's many psychological and physiological aspects. In a beautiful but wild world, this is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge and solutions. Today we're exploring a topic that touches so many of us, healing and growing from trauma and loss. And we have an exceptional guest to guide us through that conversation, Judith Belmont. Now, Judy's got over 40 years of experience as a psychotherapist in private practice, a mental health and corporate trainer, and a wellness conference speaker. She also is the author of 11 mental health and self-help books and 2 therapeutic card decks offering practical, hands-on tips for living a more positive life. Currently, she's a workplace wellness trainer for an online training company, continuing to share her invaluable insights. Judy holds a master's in clinical psychology from Heyman Medical College and a bachelor's in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. She brings a wealth of expertise and a compassionate perspective to today's conversation. We're honored to have Judy with us today. So without further ado, let's dive into and discover how we can heal and grow through even the most challenging experiences. Enjoy the show. Hi Judith, welcome to Truehope Cast. How are you? What is going well?
I am doing real well. Thank you for having me, and I'm feeling good today.
Beautiful. Well, we are going to be discussing healing and growing from trauma and loss today. But before we do that, would you mind telling us a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do?
Okay. I'm a retired psychotherapist. I was in practice for over 40 years, and now I do some mental health coaching online. And I am the author of 11 books. And my last one that was out in January of 2025 this year is 110 CBT tips and tools. And CBT stands for cognitive behavior therapy. And my focus is on providing a lot of practical tips for living a better life.
Amazing. Well, we're certainly going to talk about some of your books, because I noticed when I went into your website, you actually have a section that says bookstore, and that's where all of those 11 books are housed. So that's just amazing. So we'll certainly talk about that. But I'd love to jump into the fact that you've worked with so many individuals who are trying to navigate their trauma and their loss.
Yes.
And I wonder, what are some of the common challenges that people face when they're trying to begin that and to start moving forward?
A lot of people are not confident in themselves in healing. So they question, should I be better off by now? Or what's wrong with me? And there's a lot of self-doubt. So one of my missions with people is to not have them compare their trauma or loss to anybody else's, because people would say, oh, other people have it so much better, or don't have it so much better. And they compare, and it's never good to compare, because loss is loss and trauma is trauma, and you're entitled to your feelings. But a lot of people kind of should them away or judge them away, and that is an impediment to going through the healing process.
And do you think that people have that idea of their own healing, that they should be healing as fast as somebody else, or they maybe should just be healing quicker than they actually are? What do you think that comes down to? Because when I moved to Canada to study nutrition, I practiced as a nutritionist for 10 years. And one of the biggest things, I was going to say frustration. It's not really a frustration, but people had the expectation that they would heal their digestive health, they would heal their mental health within like a couple of sessions. they thought they would be able to take care of that in a couple of weeks, when they had probably spent maybe years, sometimes decades, and some people creating the concerns and the issues that they actually had. So what's your experience in regards to those people looking for a quick fix?
Yeah, a lot of
And
people
yeah,
want a quick fix, right?
and where do you think that comes from?
Um, I think, this is a society where things go quick and we have fast foods and, we think things should be easier, but you are very right. When it takes a long time, sometimes decades, to deal with trauma and experience trauma or loss, it doesn't mean that it's going to be much quicker going back. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't start the healing process and keep on getting better and better, but it's, often takes a lot of work.
What would you recommend to people to say, perhaps? Because I can think of people in my life who are looking to make changes to benefit themselves, benefit their families, but they do come up with those frustrations where they're not seeing the immediate results. What type of advice would you perhaps maybe have for somebody who's giving that, who's hearing that from a friend or even a partner or a family member? What would you say?
Well, I think that if you go in the right direction, you already feel better. Let's say you want to lose 40 pounds. Well, you're not going to lose 40 pounds in 1 week, but if you feel like you're making changes that set you up for losing that 40 pounds, you might feel better already. So I think just be patient with the journey, and you don't have to have everything tied up in a bow. You can be on the right path and feel empowered. And then the second part of that is know how to be empowered. And that is why my personal focus is on hands-on practical tips on how to manage stress, how to deal with anger, how to change your way of thinking, because it's much more complicated than just saying snap out of it, or, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that way.
Yeah.
Not that it has to be that complicated when you know the tools, but if you don't have the tools, how are you going to know what to do? So I think that a combination of being patient, moving in the right direction, but also learning some hands-on life skills that will get you there will help support you in your healing journey.
Beautiful. Yeah, well said. I think if you were to have that question from somebody who is on this healing journey, I think a couple of very simple, gentle questions in regards to, what expectations do they have? Why do they have the expectation to be healing as quick as they possibly can? I think just having a few reflective questions helps people understand that they should have a little bit maybe more compassion and empathy for themselves, to recognize that they are on a journey. They're going against, sometimes decades of habitual pathways that have been solidified, and we're looking to work through that and to create new neural pathways, to create new habits and new change. So
I think that's a great point. A lot of people talk to themselves in ways that they would never talk to anybody else, and they are often much more critical. And so one of the tips in my book is how to see yourself as your own best friend, and some practical ways of taking the vantage point, writing down, for example, some of the negative thoughts you have about yourself, and, oh, I screwed up this, and what would you say to yourself? And now what would you say if it was someone that you really admired, like your closest family member, friend? How would you deal with it differently? And people often are more empathetic to others than they are to themselves. So self-compassion is definitely a key.
beautiful. Yeah, I think that's a classic part of cognitive behavioral therapy, to get some of those thoughts, those feelings, those behaviors down on paper, recognize those patterns, and being able to turn it into a bit more of an exercise where you're actually reflecting rather than just internalizing the struggle that people might be having, and actually putting it down on paper and being a little bit more rational with it, I think is incredibly helpful and beneficial. But in your books and within your therapeutic card decks, you focus on practical tips for living a more positive life. I've seen that on the website. Do you think, could you share maybe a few examples of the like hands-on techniques or exercises that you recommend to help people manage through such things like trauma and grief?
Okay. So a lot of times we're stuck in habitual ways of thinking, and it makes us have very self-limiting beliefs. So this is a visualization that you can easily relate to
Can
show
you,
the importance
sorry,
of
Jude, can you just give us an example of a self-limiting belief and explain what that is for people?
just like I'm a loser. I failed. I'll never forget. I had this woman in my office. She was in her 30s, and she, over the coffee table, raised her hand and said, I had this many failures and I can't afford one more.
Wow.
So people have these limiting beliefs that they failed, they screwed up, they lost their chance, and they spend a lot of time beating themselves up. That would be an example.
Perfect.
And so to change those self-limiting beliefs, you need to first thing identify that they're irrational. So for example, I'm a loser. That is labeling. That's labeling yourself. And that's an example of what's called a cognitive distortion. So just imagine yourself having a magnifying glass and identifying the cognitive distortions behind some of your thoughts. So I'm a loser. Okay. That's labeling. That's making me one-dimensional. I'm just so much more than one label. So how can I describe it? I'm disappointed. I'm not farther along in my life right now. So that would be a rational, authentic approach versus I'm a loser.
Yep.
So that would be one example. And the visualization I was going to show you that is an example of how to be more flexible with self-limiting beliefs is clasping your fingers like this and telling me which is your thumb on top. My left thumb is on top.
Me too.
Okay. And now unclasp and intertwine your fingers so the right thumb is on top. How does it feel?
Different.
Different, awkward, strange. So a lot of times people think in one way and they need to shift slightly, because if I'm doing a live presentation, it's usually about 40, 60, 50, 50 people. Doesn't matter if you're right or left-handed. Some people are more comfortable one way versus another way. And it shows the importance of we're all different, but also what's natural for one person is not as natural for another. Sometimes it takes a lot more work for someone, for example, to be more confident and outgoing, where someone else might not have any trouble with that at all. So it's an example of a visualization. And an advanced version is folding your arms. That's even harder to do. My right arm is on top. How about yours?
My left is on top.
Okay. So now try it the other way. So sometimes in a live presentation, people just keep on going around because they can't stop it anywhere.
That feels very strange.
Very strange. So when we get out of our comfort zone is when we really start to look at things differently, and we can try to overturn some of those self-limiting beliefs. But you have to have an arsenal of tools. Just like if you're a handy person and doing things around the house, you need to have tools to help you hang up the pictures and to do what you need to do to fix your house.
Yeah. And
a lot of times people think they should know better without having to do some of the work. And some of the work would be maybe doing a log, like in my books personally, and there's plenty of self-help books out there. I have logs, worksheets, handouts, things to fill out so that you actually can learn hands-on tips. A lot of times people think they should intuitively know this stuff, but a lot of times people haven't learned it because the people who raise them, or some of the kids that they might have been bullied by or interacted with, or might not have helped them learn these skills.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I just wonder in regards to what type of advice, or do you have any other practical tips to help people understand that going from a place where you're seeking therapy, or you're seeking support, you're seeking help, you're in this place where you do want to change, it's never this like steady incline of success, and then you get to this top, and then boom, you're healed, right? There's bumps in the road. There, people go backwards. They take they take one step backwards to go forward two steps. How do you help people navigate the because I think for a lot of people, they are actually very surprised that there are bumps in the road when they're on this road for success. How do you help people navigate those challenges?
Well, the expectations have to be flexible and not be absolute. Sometimes people think I have to, keep on moving forward. And if I don't, I failed. They might blow things out of proportion. Another cognitive distortion is all or nothing thinking,
right,
where you think in black and white. I'll never get over this. I'll never be able to do that. So if you're flexible with yourself and you don't have those self-limiting beliefs, and you turn that's terrible to it's really difficult, you are more empowered. And if you have the bumps on the road, you realize that sometimes even if I made a wrong turn, it could still get me to the right place. I've always been amazed how people looking back at their lives, no matter how challenging it was, often say, I wouldn't want to trade it. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't want to trade it because I like where I am now. And as long as you can get deeper instead of weaker and keep on moving forward rather than looking back at where you went wrong. A lot of times people carry their past around like a backpack, and it weighs them down rather than use it as information. But don't get bogged in reworking the past, because it never really does get better. You might have a different narrative, but you can do that moving forward in the rearview mirror.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I think that people all have an example in their lives of somebody who went down a rocky path and they came out of it, and it was actually the motivation that they needed to do the amazing things that they have that they have now. I'm very lucky in this position to host this podcast where we've had so many amazing practitioners come onto the show, and every single one of them, I want to say, has shared their story of how they got to where they are, and 9 times out of 10 it's a story of tragedy or some sort of trauma that's led them to this very unique particular path that they're on now, and they wouldn't trade that strife for anything because of where it's got them. Yeah,
it's very inspiring. People have a lot of courage, and a lot of times they don't give themselves credit for having as much courage. And I'm always amazed at the resilience of the human spirit.
That's right. And I think that's when you're able to, when somebody who's trying to go through these changes, when they become a little bit more self-compassionate and empathetic towards themselves, and maybe put themselves in the shoes of giving advice to somebody else, what they would say, rather than the kind of the self-negative talk, then people can do amazing things, especially when they're not ruminating the same self-limiting beliefs over and over in their head, and that's creating certain feelings for lots of people which exhibit certain behaviors. In the end of it, when you can jump out of that pattern, people can do phenomenal things. That's right.
I agree.
Beautiful. I'd love to ask you about the connection between self-compassion and healing from traumatic experiences, and how you see those working together.
Self-compassion is just being kind to yourself and non-judgmental and accepting. And a lot of times when people have been through trauma, they often come out of it not feeling worthy, or feeling someone crumpled or damaged or whatever. And I see it almost like, let's say, my favorite visualization is like any denomination of a bill. So let's say it's an American money $20 bill or $100 bill. And imagine crushing it and creasing it and stepping on it and doing all this stuff, and you open it up, and how much is it worth? Still worth the same. And a lot of times people forget that, and they think that when they go through trauma, they're only kind of like half a person. They're a fraction of what they used to be. but we are no less worthy than the day that we were born. And we don't judge a newborn saying, oh, this one doesn't have as much hair as the other child in the nursery. There's something defective. We don't do that with newborns, but somehow as we get older, we learn to be very judgmental of ourselves and others. And self-compassion and empathy for others, and just general, it's called actually radical acceptance. Now, I'm not saying to accept people committing a crime and abusing you, but we're talking about a non-criminal, situation, to be accepting and realize that we have the seeds of resilience to move on. And I think self-compassion really is a very important part of that. Part of self-compassion that a lot of people have a lot of trouble with is forgiveness. Forgiving themselves for not having the foresight to what is now so obvious in hindsight. People kick themselves. Why didn't I know better? Well, as someone told me once, we didn't know everything when we were 5.
Yeah.
And we also have a hard time forgiving others who we see as causing trauma in us. But the problem is that makes us continue to be the victim instead of a victor. And so it's really important to not necessarily condone behavior that was not right, but forgiving for someone, for example, not giving you what they didn't have to give in the first place, can be very freeing.
Yeah, I think whether you're going through big changes or not, I think the practice of as you say, radical acceptance and compassion, not just for yourself but for other people, I think it's the way that people should go through life. Honestly, I think that there's so much once you can let go of like all the judgmentalism and all of that, you actually free up a lot of energy to do other things and to think different thoughts and to feel different feelings and behave in different ways. And it's a incredibly uplifting way where you're able to, flip the switch, I guess, in your brain to go from being like, a judgmental person, whether that's on what you're doing or what other people are doing. And you end up kind of seeking it out when you're in radical, you're in a radical version of that. But to have that compassion, to have that empathy, to have that acceptance for other people and yourself, you're literally freeing up energy and resources within your body to do all sorts of other different things. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of your books. So you've only written 11 books, so it's not a big deal. All on mental health and self-help. Which of your works do you think has had the most impact on helping people navigate specifically trauma and loss?
I would say that, the book is just out a few months ago, so it hasn't necessarily made the impact of some of my other books, but my latest one, 110 CBT Tips and Tools, is the most comprehensive and has the most potential for doing that, because it's basically the culmination of everything that I have learned throughout my other books, and crystallized it and packaged it in new ways. I would say my most influential book, which was my best-selling book, is for groups, 150 group activities and tips, another part of the series, because it's sold quite well and still continues to after many years. And a lot of people use these hands-on skills in working with healing groups or therapy groups or substance abuse groups or those type of things. So I think that's probably the most impact, because it just seemed to have caught on with group counseling, group therapy, support groups.
Beautiful. I've got to ask you, so I'm looking at the bookstore on your website right now, and there's a very, very specific color theme. And I've got to ask you, so our product line is this blue and this yellow that you've got there, and you can see behind me the Truehope sign as well.
Absolutely, that's right.
So tell me about the color theme that you've used for your books, because I'll share a link for people to get access so they can see what I'm seeing. But the books are in this blue and yellow. Please tell me more about that.
I was wondering why I felt so at home with this whole ambiance here. Not only just you, but also your color scheme. That's right. Um, my favorite color is blue. I love blue, and yellow to me symbolizes hope. And here you have hope in blue and yellow right there. And I love the sun and what that represents, that there's always hope for a new day. And I think it's very similar to your logo.
That's right. Well, just from what I understand about the books and what we're talking about here, you're offering tips and tools. You're offering a resource for people to take control of their own health in, I guess in a psychological manner. And you're providing an actual resource, but people have got to pick this book up. They've got to read it. They've got to practically use these skills in order to help themselves. And that's very much about what we're here at Truehope. We make natural health products, supplements, and we can just market it. We can have it out on the store, but people have got to read the research. They've got to listen to the testimonials and go and speak to the store staff and obtain information to then maybe make a purchase, and then to actually start nourishing their bodies from the inside, providing it with the nutrients it needs to be able to have everything from their digestive system to their immune system to their brains working in a more optimal way. And it's about hope. It's about providing hope. And we've been around for 28 years, and a lot of people, when they come and find our product, they've been on and off very harsh medications for sometimes decades, and they come to us, and we're not just Truehope, but we're their last hope, because they would rather probably not be. A lot of people would rather not be around than have to deal with some of the side effects that they have from some of these medications, because it can be very, very difficult to live like that. So yeah, I see a lot of similarities in regards to that hopefulness, that sun. We have the lighthouse as a kind of a beacon for hope. And it's wonderful that we're able to connect and
yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, when my publisher asked me what colors I wanted for this series, which is the Tips and Tools series for the therapeutic toolbox, I said it has to have blue, because everything that I love is blue, and also yellow for hope. So
beautiful, wonderful.
Took it from there. But I think you bring up a good point, that the mind body are so intertwined that a lot of people think, well, if I take care of, have a pill, I shouldn't have to work on my mind. It should help me do everything. But it doesn't work that way. You still have to work on yourself while you're getting the benefits of the medications and the supplements. And I think hand in hand, mind, body works together in healing.
That's right. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that. I think that through our exposure to, let's just say, allopathic medicine, we have kind of this rigid idea that we have a brain, we have a body, we have organs and separate things, and you can even go further in a reductionist manner there to say we've got a head, we have eyes, we have ears, and we have kind of specialists for all of these things, rather than thinking of them as part of this whole system and how they're connected. And for me, when I came out of nutrition school, I started working with it was basically 30-year-old men who had gut problems, along with some sort of psychological issue as well, whether they had depression or anxiety or stress or brain fog or sleep issues. And I specialized in gut health. So I was like, listen, I can help with your gut stuff, but you probably have to work with somebody who's specialized in in mental health to be able to work with that. But what I found very, very, very quickly was that as soon as I was helping people, as soon as I was helping people deal with their gut problems, their psychological symptoms were just becoming less of a problem and less of a problem and less of a problem. And we obviously know the connection between the gut and the brain through the vagal nerve, and how the majority of our immune system sits within our gut. So when we have good quality digestion under control, we have a good quality diverse microbiome, then it's going to have a massive impact on other systems, especially within our brain. So that was a big epiphany moment for me, to recognize that our brain and our body are massively connected. and that, you know, things that we can focus on in either one can have impact on the other. And I think that's an idea that's very foreign to a lot of people. I think we might just see we just have this body and kind of that's it. But when you're able to actually recognize that you've got all these amazing parts that are connected, then people become a little bit more, I don't know, maybe a little bit more in awe of this kind of amazing biological system that we have.
And it's also very empowering, because in knowing that, you're just not passively expecting things to happen to you. You realize you're part of the work.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's that root cause that we're looking for, right? You know, with cognitive behavioral therapy and all the tips that you're talking about and all the things we're talking about today, you're talking about helping people kind of like take a step back and look at the root cause of their problems, rather than, you know, masking it over with, I don't know, food addictions, sugar addictions, you know, all the other addictions that we could talk about, which is, you know, stopping people from getting to the root cause of their issue to actually make significant changes so they can, you know, step forward into their lives. And yeah, that's a big part of what we're here at Truehope, is to help people recognize that a lot of people's issues when it comes to mental health is a root cause problem of chronic nutrient deficiency. And when you're able to actually get to the root of that and provide somebody with a broad spectrum micronutrient that, you know, regardless of your digestive integrity, is going to get into your brain, get into your body and do its thing and help supplement you in that way, people can actually springboard off that and do quite amazing things for their health.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great.
Yeah. Well, back to trauma and loss. Obviously, they are incredibly isolating things that people experience. I think most people have got some kind of experience with trauma or loss,
Mm-hmm.
and how that makes people want to isolate themselves, and how that can be a tricky downward spiral from there, let's say. But what strategies do you suggest for helping people rebuild social connections during that healing process? Because isolation and becoming social, obviously they're different parts of the scale.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what do you think about that?
You actually started to say what I was going to say, which is great.
Okay.
That not being socially isolated, connecting, being able to ask for help, reaching out, feeling like you're not alone, that's one of the best things you can do in the healing process. Because if you shrivel up and you avoid people and you isolate, because some people, they end up isolating rather than reaching out,
Mm-hmm.
they end up making themselves worse.
Yeah.
It really does help to get support. Another thing is to realize that the grieving process is a normal part of life. You know, take Kubler-Ross's model of grieving. First, there's denial. No, you know, this can't be happening to me or my loved ones. Then there's anger, you know, why me or why them? And then there's bargaining. Well, maybe if I do this or if I would have done that, that wouldn't have happened. Then when that doesn't work, is depression, and then acceptance, growing from the hurt. And a lot of times people around you also might not realize anger, bargaining, and going back and forth, it's not linear, is a very important part of the healing process, and honor it all. And it's healthy to be angry. It's healthy to be bargaining. That's part of it. But you always want to reach towards acceptance, because acceptance is growing from the hurt. It's not wishing it happened, but in spite of it happening, how can I move on deeper, as I said, instead of weaker?
Yeah, I think we have a big misunderstanding in regards to how, I want to say, unnatural isolation is, especially when it comes to trauma and grief and loss. I just think back to, when, 10,000 years ago, when we'd had smaller, tight-knit communities, there'll be a very, very different way in which they would deal with loss of a tribe member or a family member, something like that. People would come together. There would be almost like celebrations of life, you could say. Be very, very different to what we have now. And I think that whenever we have kind of a 2025 issue, I always kind of think back to like what we would have done when we were in smaller communities, when we were in more tight-knit social circles. how different that would play out?
Well, some people make it now. Some people make it through their interest groups or the friends or neighbors or family. And the more you develop a sense of community, the more support you have, the easier it is to go through.
That's right. Yeah. And it's such a challenging thing because we have created within our culture this very easy pathway to isolation, with phones, and, everyone's got their own room in the house, and it's very easy to be able to block yourself off from the world, but also feel like you are actually connected through a device. And we know, well, I know, and I'm sure you know, and a lot of people know, that you can't mimic true connectivity without being, face to face with at least one other human being who can be there for you. And we talked about the importance of empathy and understanding, and how vital that is to help people grow, but especially during times where they need that. And you often need physical connection. You need a hug. You need to just be with people. You need a hand to hold. There's reasons that we instinctually do those things during those times for people. And I feel like we've got this beautiful part of our human nature is to have that understanding and that feeling of when somebody just needs a hug. There's no words there. It's this instinctual, beautiful human thing that it's a wonderful, wonderful part of who we are. And
I think isolation community is basically validating our importance.
Yeah.
And if we feel like we don't matter and we're not important, we're going to feel more isolated and depressed and not heal as well.
Yeah. Well said. Absolutely. We talked a little bit about nutrition and Truehope. I'd love to just ask about your experience and what role like foundational nutrition plays in supporting mental health and a healing journey after trauma and loss. Is that something that you've got experience in?
I don't have like a specific experience rather than anecdotal, but a lot of people have found supplements and making sure that they take care of their nutrition and generally eat well. That doesn't mean you can't, in moderation, have things that are not classically thought of as so healthy for you.
Absolutely.
I think that everything in balance is good, and certainly nutrition and supplements can certainly help that. Different people believe in different things, and I have found it extremely helpful for a lot of people. And I know I certainly, try to do the best I can with keeping myself healthy.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I take the majority of our products. I do it more as like a health maintenance, but if I know that I've got a busy week coming up, or if I'm traveling, or if I'm going, if I'm flying to the UK, for example, and I know my body is going to be in a kind of a freaked out stress state because, we're not really supposed to be 35,000 feet in the air. Right. So if I know that's going to happen, I'm going to bulk up a little bit more on the available nutrition that I give my body, because I know it's going to be in a stress state. It's going to be clutching onto resources to keep me like highly alert. So I just make sure that I'm giving my body that kind of that little bit extra to help deal with those, rather than becoming in a state of lack where I'm going to be susceptible to being overtired or sick or all these other things. So just that foundational piece where we do have these unfortunate situations in our culture now where our soil is so nutrient poor, therefore our food is nutrient poor, therefore it's very, very tricky to get all the necessary minerals, vitamins, antioxidants, amino acids, all these things from our diet. So being able to supplement is very, very important, and choosing the right one is important as well. So yeah, it's just, I think when it comes to my experience with, helping people with their gut health and then with their mental health, being able to provide your body with good quality nutrition is absolutely vital to not necessarily cure you of everything. It's not going to do that, but it's like we're talking about helping people just feel that little bit better. An example is we have people who have been depressed for a long period of time, and they start taking our product to deal with those chronic nutrient deficiencies, that they feel this like black veil is lifting very slowly from their eyes, from their head. and that gives them the different thoughts and different feelings, and then they can maybe exhibit different behaviors to maybe go and spend some more time in the sunlight, or connect with an old friend, or deal with the isolation piece that we're talking about. And then you're able to start ticking all these very important boxes of what it means to have holistic health, nutrition, community, exercise, sunlight. All these things contribute. So we're just
We need
looking.
it all.
Yeah, we need it. We need it all. And in 2025, if you don't have an active plan to take care of all these things, then it can be sometimes very tricky to do these very, let's say, fundamental human things that we absolutely need. So, it's a big piece for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. In regards to people being overwhelmed with their grief, what advice would you give to somebody who feels stuck or overwhelmed by their grief, who doesn't see any type of way to move forward?
Again, a lot of it, I would, like, if, let's say a client came to me and said this kind of thing, I would say, what are some of the thoughts that you have? And I would write them down. And then we would look and look at the quality of their thoughts, because really the quality of your thinking determines the quality of your life. And you still can be happy even if you've had a significant loss. And people who are stuck in what was, rather than use the love and the relationship that they had and all the good stuff in other relationships, if it's stifled because that person is no longer with us, through whether it's estrangement or death or divorce or whatever, you're just going to be stuck. So I would make sure the person is thinking clearly. And by what you just said, I know that person would not be thinking clearly, because they would be stuck and won't see any way out. Yeah. And there's always a way out, and there's always a way out of self-limiting beliefs. But you need some structure for that. So that might take writing things down. This would be an example of a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy approach. You write it down, and then you dispute it and say, where's the evidence that that's true, that I'll never love again? He was the only one for me. And is that fact or fiction? And then you have an alternate thought that's a healthier thought to replace the older one. Mm-hmm. And you also differentiate your feelings from your thoughts. A lot of people confuse them. You can't tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't feel sad, but you can say, that is not a healthy thought that is causing me to feel sad. So you can differentiate. For example, if someone says to you, I feel like you're criticizing me, then you can know that person is not differentiating thoughts from feelings, because I think you're criticizing me, therefore I feel angry, or I feel sad, or I feel rejected. So just those simple techniques of separating thoughts from feelings, being a thought detective, and changing the quality of your thoughts so that they're more temporary than permanent. Instead of, I'll never get it together, it's been hard to get it together up until now. Once you start thinking in more temporary ways, you open up doorways. And then there's true hope.
I love that. That's a great little, that's a clip that I'm going to use. Absolutely. With the true hope at the end there. That's wonderful. Yeah. The practice of writing down the thoughts that come in for us and then actually assessing it on paper. Is there any evidence? Is there any validity to these thoughts? Is a really interesting, very, very simple idea, because at the end of the day, if you can't find any evidence for that thought, then you can hopefully start slowly evaporating that thought and start thinking something different.
There's been a lot of research with cognitive behavior therapy. It is the most widely adopted orientation in the world. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of validity to how effective it can be. Because if you don't isolate your unhealthy thoughts, replace them with healthier ones and challenge them, identify those cognitive distortions, you're going to be trapped in very self-limiting beliefs that just make you feel down and depressed and anxious.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people, it's actually called ants. People don't understand that they have these automatic negative thoughts called ants because they're so automatic. And so one of the techniques that I have in my book is looking at your thoughts instead of from your thoughts.
Yeah.
So instead of I'm a failure, imagining that being written on a cloud or a leaf on a stream. That's actually taken from acceptance and commitment therapy. Stephen Hayes developed that brand, which is kind of an offshoot of cognitive behavior therapy, and they work very well together. And basically, imagine yourself looking at a cloud, I'm a failure, and looking at them rather than, there I go again, having that thought rather than I'm a failure. So a lot of times we need to just have what's called an observing head, where instead of being wrapped up in the thoughts, to observe them and observe the quality, and then you can begin to question the validity.
Wonderful. I think that's I think a lot of people can actually do that like right away. They can, I think if you were to ask people to take a second and think about and write down what are the reoccurring self-limiting beliefs or negative self-talk that people might have, I think that they would be able to come to a couple of sentences pretty quickly, and then be able to very quickly assess that using CBT methods. And there's some amazing.
Identify your core beliefs, that's even better. And the core beliefs are, usually we have one or two core beliefs that surface in a lot of negative beliefs, such as, let's say you're at a meeting and you're afraid of speaking up. Okay, why are you afraid? I don't want to say something stupid. If you did, what would that mean to you? So you ask yourself, if I did, what would that mean? It would mean I'm not as smart as everyone else. If that was true, what would that mean? It would mean people might not like me. If it's true, what would that mean? So you keep on digging by asking yourself, what would that mean? And at base, the core belief is I'm worthless, or I'm not important, or I'm flawed. And so once you work on that core belief, a lot of those anxiety, depressing kind of thoughts will be seen in a different light.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's really, really cool. And I think when you are talking about making significant neurological changes, you know, I think when people hear maybe that they're changing their thoughts, there's actually something very physical going on in there in regards to obviously your neural connections. And I tell you what's incredibly important for creating new neural connections and breaking down old ones is foundational nutrition, because you're unable to create new high quality nerve cells without the necessary building blocks in order to do that. So I think that making these types of changes and taking good quality nutrition at the same time is absolutely vital.
You can see it like a partnership, the mind and the body, working on your mind and your body. It's, you know, there's a synergy that both together work better than one and one separately.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Judith. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Do you can you mind telling us a little bit about where people can contact you? Where's the best place to do that? They can learn more and maybe even pick up one of your books.
Great, thank you. Well, you can look on my Amazon page. I have an author page on Amazon. And also you can go to my website, which is belmontwellness.com. And I have a lot of free resources on there. I do have a lot of sample worksheets and handouts, a couple from my latest book, but they're all from different books. And it would be a good practice to, you know, see the types of things that's out there that you could actually learn hands-on skills to better your thoughts, to better your life.
Beautiful. Well, that's wonderful. Well, I'm going to make sure that the Amazon link and your website link are in the show notes so people can find that very easily. So no problem there. But I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today, sharing your experience, sharing your stories and your wisdom. I think we talked a lot about CBT, which I think we haven't really talked about that much on the show. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and broaching that topic with people. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Awesome. Well, that is it for this episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. Again, all the information you may need to connect with Judith will be in the show notes, so go ahead and click there and navigate your way. You can leave us a review on iTunes and a star review on Spotify if you fancy doing that. But that is it for this week. We'll see you soon.